Captain Vex Corlani pressed his four clawed fingers against the viewing port of the excavation ship Stellar Claw, watching the mining drones tear through what remained of the third planet from this unremarkable yellow star. The dust clouds billowed up like ancient ghosts, carrying with them the secrets of a species that had vanished 3 centuries before the Galactic Coalition even knew this system existed. "Still nothing but rocks and metal scraps," muttered his second-in-command, Lieutenant Zarathek, her violet skin shifting to a frustrated purple hue. "The command is going to have our heads if we don't find something valuable soon." Vex's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. "Oh, how wrong you are about to be, my pessimistic friend." The planet below them had once been called Earth, though the Corlani databases simply labeled it as designation Zerian 7. Its former inhabitants, the humans, had apparently been quite fond of destroying themselves and their world with admirable efficiency. Nuclear warfare, climate disasters, resource depletion, the usual recipe for planetary suicide that the Coalition had witnessed dozens of times across the galaxy. "Sir," Communications Officer Jack Voss's voice crackled through the bridge speakers, his excitement causing his normally steady tone to waver. "Mining Team Alpha has found something. They're requesting immediate backup and, sir, they sound terrified." Vex's 3 eyes swiveled independently, a trait that had made him an excellent ship captain but a terrible date. "Terrified? Of what? Old human bones?" "They wouldn't say, sir, just kept repeating coordinates and screaming about finding the real ruins beneath what they thought was bedrock." The captain's interest perked up like a hunting hound catching a scent. Finally, something interesting on this miserable assignment. The Coalition had sent them here expecting to find the usual post-apocalyptic debris, twisted metal, plastic fragments, maybe some primitive nuclear materials if they were lucky. Instead, they'd been sifting through centuries of dirt and disappointment. "Set course for those coordinates," Vex ordered, his excitement causing his exoskeleton to emit a soft bioluminescent glow. "And prep the heavy excavation gear. If Team Alpha found something that scared them, it's either very dangerous or very valuable. Possibly both." The Stellar Claw descended through the planet's thinning atmosphere, its hull groaning against the gravitational pull. Earth's gravity was roughly 0.73 times that of Corlani Prime, which made movement slightly easier, but also strangely unsettling. Everything felt too light, too quick, as if the universe itself was moving at the wrong speed. As they approached the dig site, Vex could see the massive crater that Team Alpha had carved into the planet's surface. Their industrial mining equipment had torn through layers of sediment, revealing glimpses of what lay hidden beneath. But what caught his attention wasn't the hole itself, it was the perfect geometric patterns visible along its walls. "Those aren't natural formations," Zara observed, her skin now shifting to a pale green of worry. "Look at those angles. Those lines. That's architecture. Architecture buried under 300 years of planetary destruction," Vex corrected, though his own excitement was growing. "The question is, how old is it really?" They landed near the excavation site, where Team Alpha's equipment sat abandoned like toys discarded by frightened children. The mining drones hovered in perfect formation, their programming still running but their operators nowhere to be seen. Emergency beacons blinked red against the dusty landscape, painting everything in an ominous crimson glow. "Where is everyone?" Jack asked through the comm, his voice small and uncertain. Before anyone could answer, a figure emerged from the crater. It was Coates, Team Alpha's lead engineer, though he looked nothing like the confident professional who had descended earlier that day. His orange carapace had turned a sickly yellow, and his movements were jerky, erratic. Captain Coates called out, his voice carrying an odd echo that made Vex's sensory organs twitch. "You need to see this. You all need to see what we found down there." "Where's the rest of your team?" Vex demanded as he disembarked from the ship, his officers following close behind. Coates' laugh was a sound that would haunt Vex's dreams for years to come. "They're still down there, still looking, still learning. The humans, Captain, the humans weren't what we thought they were." The way he said humans made it sound like a curse word, or perhaps a prayer. Vex couldn't decide which disturbed him more. They followed Coax to the edge of the crater, where a crude elevator had been rigged to provide access to the lower levels. As they descended, the walls around them transformed from natural stone and sediment to something else entirely. The architecture was unlike anything in the Coalition databases, not the brutal functionality of Korlani construction, nor the flowing organic curves preferred by the Voldris. This was something new. Something that spoke of purpose and power in equal measure. "How far down does this go?" Zara whispered, though her voice seemed to carry much further than it should have in the enclosed space. "We stopped counting after the 15th level," Coax replied. "The structure just keeps going, and the power readings, Captain, whatever this place is, it's still active." Active. Vex's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sure sign of agitation. "You mean there are still functioning systems after 3 centuries? 3 centuries. Coax laughed again, that disturbing sound that raised the hackles on everyone present. "Captain, according to our dating equipment, some of these lower levels are over 50,000 years old." The elevator shuddered to a halt, and they stepped out into a corridor that defied explanation. The walls emitted a soft, steady light that required no visible power source. The air was clean, breathable, and carried the faint scent of something that reminded Vex uncomfortably of ozone and electricity. "This is impossible," Zara muttered, running her sensors along the wall surfaces. "These materials, I'm getting readings that don't match anything in our databases. It's like they're made of elements that shouldn't exist." "Oh, they exist," said a new voice from the shadows ahead. "We just didn't know about them yet." Another member of Team Alpha emerged from the gloom. It was Nyx, their xenoarchaeologist, but like Coax, she seemed fundamentally changed. Her movements were too precise, too purposeful, and her eyes held a light that definitely hadn't been there before. "Nyx," Vex said carefully, "what happened to you down here?" "We learned the truth, Captain. About the humans. About what they really were before they decided to play at being primitive." She gestured toward a series of panels embedded in the wall, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. They weren't just another failed species. They were builders, planners, and they saw us coming long before we ever found them. "That's ridiculous," Jek protested. "Our records show humans barely achieved interplanetary travel before they destroyed themselves. They were warlike, chaotic, completely unable to cooperate on anything meaningful." Nyx's smile was perhaps the most unsettling thing Vex had ever seen. That's what they wanted everyone to think. "Come, let me show you the truth." She led them further into the complex, past chambers filled with equipment that hummed with quiet efficiency. The technology was clearly advanced, but it had an organic quality that made it seem almost alive. Surfaces curved and flowed like living tissue, while control interfaces responded to touch with an intuitive grace that surpassed even the most sophisticated Coalition systems. "This doesn't make sense," Zara whispered. "If humans had this level of technology, why were they still fighting with primitive weapons? Why didn't they colonize other worlds?" "Because," Nyx replied, "they were preparing for something much bigger than colonial expansion." They entered a central chamber that took Vex's breath away. The room was vast, easily large enough to house a Coalition battleship, and filled with a 3-dimensional display that showed star maps of incredible detail. Not just their local galaxy, but dozens of others, with movement patterns and trajectories marked in intricate detail. "Galactic positioning charts," Coax said, though his voice carried an odd reverence. "Dating back over 40,000 years. They were tracking the movement of every spacefaring species in this entire galactic cluster." "Tracking us," Vex realized, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh yes," Nyx confirmed. "They knew about the Korlani Empire when your people were still discovering fire. They tracked the rise of the Valdris Confederation, the expansion of the Zephyrian trade networks, the formation of what would eventually become the Galactic Coalition. They watched. They waited. They prepared. The display shifted, zooming in on their current location. Earth appeared not as the primitive backwater they had assumed, but as the center of an incredibly complex network of monitoring stations, hidden facilities, and what could only be described as strategic assets scattered throughout the galaxy. Prepared for what? Vex asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. For the test, Nix replied. You see, Captain, humanity had a theory about spacefaring civilizations. They believed that any species advanced enough to achieve interstellar travel would eventually face a choice, cooperation or domination. They wanted to see which path the galaxy would choose. So they faked their own extinction, Zara said, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. They staged their apparent destruction and went underground. Literally in this case. Nix gestured to the facility around them. For 3 centuries they've been watching how the Coalition treats dead worlds, how thoroughly you strip mine planets for resources, how little respect you show for the remains of extinct civilizations. And now? Vex asked, though his voice came out as barely more than a croak. The lights in the chamber suddenly blazed brighter, and new figures emerged from passages that hadn't been there moments before. They looked human, but there was something different about them, something enhanced. Their eyes held intelligence that seemed to burn with cold fire, and their movements carried the confidence of beings who had been planning this moment for centuries. Now, said the apparent leader, a woman with silver hair and features that seemed almost too perfect to be natural, we've learned everything we need to know about your coalition. And frankly, we're disappointed. Vex's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm, but the weapon felt suddenly heavier than it should have. Looking down, he saw that it was dissolving, its molecular structure apparently undoing itself before his eyes. Don't be alarmed, Captain, the woman continued conversationally. We're not going to hurt you. You're going to help us deliver a message to your coalition leadership. What kind of message? Vex managed to ask. The kind that ends civilizations, she replied with a smile that was all teeth and cold promise. You see, your people have failed our test quite spectacularly. The way you treat worlds like ours, the casual destruction of entire ecosystems for short-term resource gain, the complete disregard for anything that can't immediately benefit your expansion, well, it's exactly what we hoped you wouldn't do. You're insane, Jek whispered. There are billions of beings in the coalition. You can't just. Can't we? The woman's expression didn't change, but suddenly every piece of technology in the chamber began to hum with increased power. Captain, do you know how many supposedly extinct worlds your coalition has strip-mined in the past century? Vex didn't answer. He was beginning to understand that the question was rhetorical. 47, she continued. 47 worlds that your databases list as lifeless dead, suitable only for resource extraction. Would you like to know how many of those worlds were actually lifeless? The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. None of them, Captain. Not a single one. The chamber around them began to change, walls becoming transparent to reveal vast spaces beyond. Spaces filled with beings of every conceivable type. Some looked like the evolved descendants of species the Coalition had written off as extinct centuries ago. Others were clearly artificial, constructed beings of impossible complexity and beauty. And among them all, moving with the confidence of those who belonged, were humans, thousands of them, maybe millions. We've been collecting refugees, Captain. Every species your coalition has casually written off and forgotten. Every world you've deemed dead had survivors, and we've been giving them sanctuary. We've been giving them purpose. This is impossible, Vex breathed. The resources alone, the logistics, the coordination required, would be impossible for a species like yours, the woman agreed. But then we've had 50,000 years to prepare. Did you really think that a species capable of this level of planning would actually destroy itself with something as mundane as nuclear warfare? The displays around them shifted again, showing real-time images from across the galaxy. The Coalition mining operations grinding to a halt as their equipment mysteriously failed. Trade routes disrupted by what appeared to be natural phenomena but followed patterns too precise to be coincidental. Military installations losing power, communication networks experiencing selective failures, and everywhere the same message appearing on screens across coalition space. The test is over, the message read in every coalition language simultaneously. You have been found wanting. Evacuation protocols are now in effect. You have 72 hours to withdraw from all occupied worlds to your species' original homeworlds. Failure to comply will result in more direct intervention. 72 hours. Zara's voice cracked with disbelief. Do you have any idea what you're asking? The logistics alone of moving entire populations are your problem, not ours, the woman replied calmly. We're simply informing you of the schedule. The infrastructure exists to make this possible. Whether your leadership chooses to use it is up to them. Vex felt something cold settle in his stomach. And if we refuse? The woman's smile widened, but her eyes remained utterly without warmth. Then you'll learn why 47 civilizations chose to fake their own extinctions rather than face US directly. The return trip to coalition space took 18 hours, but to Captain Vex Corlani it felt like 18 lifetimes. His ship, the Stellar Claw, now carried passengers he never expected, 3 humans who had volunteered to accompany them as cultural liaisons. The woman with silver hair had introduced herself simply as Director Sarah Mills, though Vex suspected that wasn't her real name. Her 2 companions, a dark-skinned man called Marcus Webb and an Asian woman named Dr. Lin Zhang, spoke with the casual authority of beings who had been preparing for this conversation for centuries. You're remarkably calm for someone whose entire worldview just got shattered, Dr. Zhang observed, settling into a chair that had mysteriously appeared in the ship's conference room. Vex was certain that chair hadn't been there when they'd departed Earth. I'm in shock, Vex replied honestly, his mandibles clicking in a pattern that indicated severe stress among his kind. My species prides itself on thorough intelligence gathering. How did we miss something this significant? Marcus chuckled, a sound that somehow managed to be both warm and terrifying. Because we wanted you to miss it. Captain, do you know what humans excel at better than any other species we've encountered? Apparently, deception, Lieutenant Zarathek muttered from her position by the viewport. Her skin had remained a worried green ever since they'd left the underground facility. Patience, Director Mills corrected. We excel at patience. Your people, the Corlani, you think in terms of military campaigns that last months, maybe years. The Voldris plan their economic strategies across decades. Even the long-lived Zephyrians rarely think beyond a few centuries. And humans? Vex asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. We plan in millennia, Dr. Zhang replied matter-of-factly. The facility you visited today? Construction began over 50,000 years ago. We've been preparing for first contact with spacefaring civilizations since before your ancestors developed written language. Communications Officer Jack Voss looked up from his station, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. That's impossible. Human civilization is only a few thousand years old according to our archaeological surveys. Your archaeological surveys, Marcus said with obvious amusement, found exactly what we wanted them to find. Surface settlements, primitive tools, evidence of a species that developed technology quickly but lacked the wisdom to use it responsibly. The perfect cautionary tale. But why? Zara demanded, her frustration causing her skin to shift through several shades of purple. Why go to such elaborate lengths to hide your true capabilities? Director Mills leaned forward, her expression becoming serious. Because we needed to know what kind of neighbors we were going to have. Captain, in the past 500 years, how many species has the Coalition encountered that were more technologically advanced than yourselves? Vex considered the question. None. We've always been the most advanced civilization in any first contact scenario. Exactly. And how do you typically handle species that are less advanced? The silence that followed was answer enough. You integrate them into your economic system, Dr. Zhang continued when no one spoke. You relocate them if their worlds have valuable resources. You educate them just enough to be useful, but not enough to be competitive. You treat them as junior partners in a relationship where they'll never be equals. That's standard procedure for cultural integration, Jack protested weakly. It prevents conflicts and ensures stable development. It prevents competition, Marcus corrected bluntly. And it's exactly the kind of behavior we wanted to evaluate before revealing ourselves. The ship's main display suddenly activated without anyone touching the controls, showing a real-time view of Coalition space. Vex watched in fascination and growing horror as mining operations across dozens of worlds simply stopped. Massive industrial complexes went dark. Transport ships found themselves gently but firmly redirected away from occupied systems. It was happening everywhere, simultaneously, with a coordination that spoke of planning on an unimaginable scale. How? Vex whispered. We've had agents embedded in every major coalition institution for over 2 centuries, Director Mills explained casually. Your military academies, your industrial corporations, your scientific research facilities, your government bureaucracies. Some of them don't even know they're working for us. That's infiltration on a scale that Zara's voice trailed off as the implications hit her. That requires resources and coordination beyond anything your coalition has ever imagined, Dr. Zhang finished. Captain, what do you think happens when a species spends 50,000 years developing technology while the rest of the galaxy catches up? Vex didn't want to think about it, but the evidence was all around him. The casual way these humans manipulated matter at the molecular level. The instantaneous communication across galactic distances. The ability to coordinate operations spanning hundreds of worlds with apparently no delay or confusion. You're not just more advanced than us, he realized. You're so far ahead that we might as well be using stone tools. Finally, someone gets it, Marcus said with approval. Though to be fair, some of your coalition technologies are quite impressive. We've learned a lot from watching your development over the past few centuries. Learned from us? Jack's voice cracked with indignation. You've been studying us like laboratory specimens. Yes, Director Mills replied without apology. We needed to understand how galactic civilization would develop without our direct influence. We needed to see if intelligence naturally leads to wisdom, or if advancement simply makes beings more efficient at being destructive. The ship's communication system chimed with an incoming priority message from Coalition Command. Vex looked at his human passengers, who nodded permission for him to answer. Admiral Krex Thane's image appeared on the main screen, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of barely controlled panic. Captain Korlani, what is your status? We're receiving reports of simultaneous system failures across 17 sectors. Industrial operations are shutting down, military installations are going dark, and we're getting the same incomprehensible message on every communication channel. It's not incomprehensible, Admiral, Vex replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. It's an ultimatum. The humans aren't extinct. They never were, and they've been watching us. The Admiral's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on disbelief. That's impossible, Captain. Our surveys of Earth were thorough. The planet was devastated, the population extinct. Director Mills moved into view of the camera, her presence causing the Admiral's mandibles to freeze mid-click. Admiral Thane, isn't it? We've heard a lot about you. Your military strategies are quite innovative, though somewhat predictable once you understand the underlying patterns. What are you? The Admiral managed. I'm Director Sarah Mills, representing the Terran Conservation Authority. We're the organization responsible for managing humanity's relationship with emerging galactic civilizations. Her tone was perfectly polite, which somehow made her words more unsettling. We need to discuss the future of coalition expansion policies. You can't be serious, Admiral Thane sputtered. Do you have any idea of the scope of what you're demanding? The coalition spans over 300 systems, millions of installations, billions of beings whose livelihoods depend on interstellar commerce. "Oh, we're quite aware of the scope," Dr. Zhang interjected, moving into the camera's view. "We've been monitoring every aspect of coalition operations for centuries. We know exactly how many beings you'll need to relocate, how much shipping capacity you'll require, and how long the process should reasonably take." 72 hours is impossible, the Admiral protested. 72 hours is what you have, Marcus replied, also stepping into view. "Though we should mention that the timer started 6 hours ago, so you're actually down to 66 hours and counting." Vex watched his superior's expression cycle through disbelief, anger, fear, and finally a kind of resigned calculation that was deeply familiar to anyone who'd served in the coalition military. "What are your terms?" Admiral Thane asked finally. "Simple," Director Mills replied. "Complete withdrawal from all worlds not originally inhabited by coalition species. Cessation of resource extraction operations on any planet that once supported indigenous life. Reparations for displaced populations, to be administered through neutral parties. And if we refuse, then we stop being polite about it," Dr. Zhang said with a smile that never reached her eyes. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the ship's bridge in tense silence. Vex looked at his human passengers, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd just witnessed. "You're really going to force the entire coalition to withdraw to their homeworlds?" he asked. "We're going to give them the opportunity to do so voluntarily," Director Mills corrected. "What they choose to do with that opportunity is up to them. And if they choose to fight—" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Captain, your coalition military has impressive ships, advanced weapons and experienced commanders. But you've been fighting wars against opponents who use similar technology and tactics. You've never faced an enemy that can turn your own equipment against you. That can manipulate matter at the quantum level, that can be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Besides," Dr. Zhang added, "we're not really interested in fighting a war. Wars are inefficient, messy, and ultimately pointless when you have other options." "What other options?" Zara asked, though her voice suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "We could simply make your ships stop working," Director Mills explained conversationally, "or make your weapons refuse to fire, or convince your computer systems that they're actually houseplants. The possibilities are quite extensive when you understand technology at the fundamental level we do." The ship's sensors suddenly registered something that shouldn't have been possible. They were no longer alone in space. Surrounding the stellar claw in perfect formation were dozens of ships unlike anything in coalition databases. They seemed to be constructed from materials that bent light around them, creating vessels that were simultaneously visible and invisible, solid and ethereal. "Our escort," Marcus explained, noticing Vex's attention to the sensor readings. "We thought it would be appropriate to provide Admiral Thane with a visual demonstration of our capabilities." "Those ships," Jek whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror, "they're not showing up on any of our targeting systems." "That's because they're not entirely in this dimension," Dr. Zhang replied as if discussing the weather. "Multidimensional engineering. Very useful for avoiding unpleasant interactions with hostile forces." Vex felt the last of his assumptions about the universe crumble away. "What are you really? What are humans really?" Director Mills considered the question seriously. What happens when a species chooses cooperation over domination, patience over aggression, wisdom over cleverness? We're what your coalition could become, given enough time and the right choices. But you're also what happens when that same species gets really, really tired of watching other civilizations make the same destructive mistakes over and over again. Marcus added with dark humor. The ship's communication system activated again, this time showing a split screen with multiple coalition leaders. Admiral Thane was there, along with High Counselor Vex Prime of the Corlani Empire, Trade Minister Lisa Kell of the Valdris Confederation, and several other figures that Vex recognized as major political leaders. "We've conferred," Admiral Thane announced, though his expression suggested the conference hadn't gone well. "The coalition cannot comply with your demands. The economic disruption alone would cause the collapse of interstellar civilization as we know it." "Yes," Director Mills agreed calmly. "That's rather the point. You can't be serious about destroying galactic civilization over philosophical differences," High Counselor Vex Prime protested, and his own mandibles clicking in patterns of extreme agitation. "We're not destroying anything," Dr. Zhang corrected. "We're simply ending an experiment that has run its course. Galactic civilization, as you call it, has had 3 centuries to develop sustainable, cooperative relationships between species. Instead, you've created an extraction-based economy that treats entire worlds as disposable resources. But the alternative is chaos," Trade Minister Kell interjected. "Without centralized coordination, without unified standards and protocols, the galaxy will fragment into isolated systems." "Perhaps," Marcus conceded. "Or perhaps individual species will be forced to develop more sustainable relationships with their environments and their neighbors. We're curious to see which outcome emerges." "This is insane," Admiral Thane declared. "You're gambling with the lives of billions of beings based on some untested theory about social development." "Admiral," Director Mills replied, her voice carrying a note of finality that made Vex's exoskeleton shiver. "We've been testing theories about social development for 50,000 years. This isn't a gamble, this is a conclusion." The communication ended again, and Vex found himself staring at 3 beings who had just casually dismissed the combined leadership of the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now we wait," Director Mills replied. 57 hours and counting. Your leaders will spend most of that time trying to find a military solution that doesn't exist, then looking for a diplomatic compromise that we won't accept. Finally, with about 6 hours left on the deadline, they'll begin the withdrawal." "You sound very certain of that," Zara observed. "We should," Dr. Zhang said with that unsettling smile. "We've run this scenario thousands of times with different variables. The outcome is always the same." "And after the withdrawal?" Vex pressed. "After the withdrawal, the real work begins," Marcus replied. "Helping species learn to live sustainably within their means, teaching cooperation instead of competition, showing civilizations that there are alternatives to endless expansion and resource extraction. Whether they want to learn or not," Director Mills added quietly. As Vex looked out at the impossible ships surrounding them, at the beings who had casually dismantled everything he thought he knew about the universe, and he realized that humanity hadn't just faked their extinction. They had evolved beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. And now, after millennia of patient observation, they had decided that the rest of the galaxy needed to evolve too. The only question was whether that evolution would be voluntary or not. In 57 hours, they would all find out.